Sup, buckaroos? If you haven't noticed, I have been gone for quite a while. That is in part because school is a thing, partly because I have been working on a much larger video, God help me, and partly because I have been playing obscene amounts of Honkai Star Rail. I did not expect to really get into this game like I have, but a couple hours in and all of the version 1.0 story content finished, I have a lot to say. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna make a couple of videos on this game. On May 2nd of 2023, the Honkai Star Rail YouTube channel uploaded a video called Myriad Celestia Trailer Fables About the Stars Part 1. After watching it, my immediate thought was, well, that was quite a bit like Travail, except this time there was way more to it and it was way more incomprehensible. And by way more, I absolutely mean it. So let's give this insanely dense trailer the Travail treatment and go scene by scene and give an absolute breakdown of everything that's said in this trailer. I also wanted to kind of give an absolute comprehensive breakdown and introduction to Aeons and Star Rail lore in general, but that's way too much and that would have caused this video to balloon in size, and I don't need another 2-hour video on my hands. So let's just stick to the story of this trailer right now and we'll get into Aeons and that discussion in later videos. Okay, so let's talk about the title of the video first. The words Myriad Celestia by themselves don't really mean a whole lot, so let's just kind of let that be. But I do want to talk about the second half of the trailer's title, Fables About the Stars Part 1. So a fable is a short, simple story that tells a straightforward moral. Chances are, if you were ever in school at any point in your life, you've probably read an Aesop fable. Those are good examples. However, fables don't have to be short, they don't have to be simple, and they most definitely do not have to tell a simple and straightforward moral. A very good use of a fable is to use the storytelling medium to describe the morals and belief systems of, say, a god or an Aeon. Oddly enough, there is a book in the universe of Star Rail titled Fables About the Stars. It's by somebody named Adrian Spencer Smith. Short passages of it can be found as epigraphs in certain databank entries, namely that for Akavili, I don't know how to say their name. Tezaranth, the propagation, and Hu, the equilibrium. I think it's Hu. It could be also Ho-Oh, but I'm going to go with Hu. And since the quotes that are given about those particular Aeons are very pertinent to the Aeons themselves, it can be inferred that this book is a collection of fables or stories regarding each individual Aeon with the purpose of describing each Aeon's path or the philosophies they operate under. So this is all to say that this trailer that we have in front of us is a passage from a book about the Aeons, which is confirmed to us in the last scene of the trailer where the narrator, this is the Black Swan, closes a book that she was reading from. Okay, so that's nice to know, but which Aeon is the story about? Well, let's actually start looking at the trailer and see if we can deduce this, because it is kind of hard to clock, but it is there. And once we do identify that, that provides a lot of theory food. So let's just watch the trailer. Let's go. The trailer opens to a narrator who, through descriptions on Bilibili, we know is a character named Black Swan, who is voiced by Aaron Zek. She starts off with lines that, remember, are all quotes from the book that she's reading out of. It's a monologue where one person is offering an exchange of memories, and the person that is offering starts with their memory. She says she once had a dream where she dreamed of a ray of light coming from a crystal chalice, and the light spoke to her. So let's stop right there and use this bit of information to kind of ground ourselves for the rest of this trailer, because if you miss this major foundational point, you'll be confused for the entire trailer to come. The primary thing I want you to take away is that there are layers to this narration. At the very top, we have Black Swan, who is reading from a book. That book has a narrator who is nameless, who is recounting a dream they once had. In that dream, the narrator recounts another narrator, the Crystal Chalice, that spoke to her. And the entire dream from here on is a recounting of what that Crystal Chalice said. This might seem a little strange or unnecessary, but trust me, with this understanding of the framing device being used, a lot of stuff later into the trailer just clicks into place real fast.
Let's make an exchange, shall we? An exchange of memories. I dreamed of a ray of light, of a crystal chalice. The light that shone from that crystal spoke to me. Listen to the parable of the stars.
So let me call you back to the beginning of the actual game. Remember when Kafka was talking to us and she kept repeating listen and the word listen being like highlighted? I think this is supposed to be a reference to that, and this trailer references it a lot, or at least it has a similar origin to that. Star Rail has this very strange obsession with observation, in particular listening, but also watching and feeling and whatever. That combined with how the Aeons are titled with the and then the thing they represent, it makes it hard for me not to draw direct parallels to the Magnus Archives, but that's besides the point. For some reason, the powers that be in this game really want us to stop and listen, and listening is an extremely prevalent motif both in the game as well as just in this trailer. So a parable is a kind of story that is similar to a fable, except it doesn't usually use personification of animals or plants. Technically, a fable doesn't have to do that either to be considered a fable, but in the case here, fable and parable pretty much mean the same thing. The one difference is that a parable usually has more secular connotations, with the term parable usually referring to a collection of tales told by Jesus in the Bible. But for the sake of simplicity, parable and fable are synonymous here. So this crystal chalice is telling this narrator to listen to the parable of the stars, or in other words, the fables about the stars. The book all but references itself, so it knows what it is.
The nameless one, the pathless one, arrived from the edge of the wilderness, clad in stellar radiance.
Okay, I find this line very odd because it really doesn't fit in anywhere. The trailer just kind of veers off to one side to acknowledge this nameless one, and then just continues on if nothing had happened. I guess it could be saying that this parable is about the pathless one, or that there is a parable about the pathless one that the narrator should be listening to. I don't know. So then, who is the nameless one? Instinct tells me, and most other people, that it's referring to the main character of the game, the Trailblazer, but I don't think that's the case. The main reason is that the main character didn't exist when this book was written, considering they were literally born to some mechanic at the start of the game. I think that this is actually talking about Akavili, the Aeon Trailblaze, the most standout Aeon there is or was. This line is talking about how Akavili came to become an Aeon, I think. They just kind of arrived out of the wilderness, out of nowhere, with a stellar glow that is unique to only Aeons. At least that's my interpretation of clad in stellar radiance. This is a very vague line. You could take it a billion different ways. So the trailer gets back on track with the line,
Go now, march unwaveringly into solar wind. At the end, you will return to my embrace, but march towards the light.
Here we are introduced to yet another motif both in this trailer and in the entire game, embracing or hugging. We hear about it a few times, but it's most prominent here, where the narrator is saying to go on a journey into solar winds and return to the embrace of the voice from the chalice, and in Sheepa's section, but we'll get there. Just keep that motif of embrace in mind. So let's talk about the visuals for this opening scene, because it's actually kind of fascinating. So the first thing that we see that isn't a black screen is a scene that is identical to the odd, like, space overlook of the entire galaxy that we are put in when the MC almost dies and is later given the power of preservation at the end of Eurylos 6. After lingering on that shot for a while, we then cut to this person, who we know is the Black Swan. She has cards fanned out on the table in front of her, and the cards resemble the cards that Kafka handles in the launch trailer that came out. Aside from that, I want you to notice these candles here, and then beyond that, we can move on from this scene because there isn't really that much to deduce. Just know that she's handling tarot cards, and these candles are very strange and like crystalline. Okay, so that's everything I want to say about the introduction. We're gonna loop back around and kind of put everything that happened into context, but for now that's all I have to say about that. The trailer from here on takes a very similar structure to Travail, in that we go Aeon by Aeon while the narrator gives us a vague description about the story and the philosophy and whatever that has to do with each respective Aeon. Most notably, however, is that it does not follow a particular order, unlike in Travail. If it were to follow the order in which the main character receives their blessings, it would start with Nanook, which the trailer does, and then go to Qlipoth, but that's not what happens. Qlipoth is instead pushed further, and instead it goes Nanook, then Lan. So the order with which the narrator talks about each Aeon is not a particular order that we know of, or if it is, then there's something wrong with our meeting with Klepoth to where it wasn't really counted. It's very, very, very strange. So just kind of don't really pay much mind to the order in which the Aeons appear in this trailer, because there's something weird with it. Something else to note also is that with each title card of each Aeon, we are given a little poem that summarizes each Aeon's path or the philosophy behind it. They do get a little difficult to read, but worry not, I have figured out what all of them say, and I will read each one aloud and then give whatever interpretations, if any, I have regarding them, because sometimes they don't really do a whole lot aside from just restate what the Aeon is about. But we'll do that and then we'll get into each narration. So the trailer starts with Nanook, the destruction. His poem reads, "At the universe's core lies a flame. It burns ever so intensely till entire galaxies are incinerated, for the sole purpose of embracing a splendid destruction at the end of all reality." To me, this just screams two things. Either the frenzied flame from Elden Ring, or the Honkai. The last two lines of the Nanook poem really hammer this point home, because the destruction does not solely want to end the universe, it wants to end all reality, which includes the entirety of the imaginary tree in my mind. Now, I am also aware that in this trailer there are hidden mentions of an Aeon that we have only heard about in hidden loading screens across the game, which is the finality, and I am aware that the finality is present in very late game Honkai Impact lore. However, the discussions around the finality are even more long-winded than any other tangent I'm avoiding in this video, and the information on the finality is extremely strange and hard to come by, and since I don't entirely understand the finality, we'll put that to the wayside. Again, the finality is in my crosshairs. I will tackle them eventually, just not right now.
Yet that light began to burn, piercing through the clouds as a golden death. Towers crumbled, and the people fled, for the sun was soon to set and meet with vicious destruction.
So getting back fully on track, the important thing here in this voice line is the idea of light. Nanook radiates an amber, fiery gold light that burns and pierces. This is juxtaposed with the clear, crystal, white, prismatic light that is speaking to the narrator in the first place. That is further juxtaposed with the light of Klepoth, the preservation, who also bears a fiery amber light, but is seemingly much more tame and controlled with it. However, we'll get to Klepoth when we get to Klepoth. The last line of this section is interesting to me because it kind of implies that a whole lights out situation, or kind of a end of the universe in Outer Wilds, or silent rapture in Iron Lung, is kind of the end that Nanook ultimately seeks for every system that he touches. He seeks to destroy the warmth and light that keeps humanity alive, the flame that burns to, sustain life. Moving on to land, the hunt, the poem here reads, "In the first 10,000 years, the hunters struggled for survival. In the second 10,000 years, the hunters fight out of anger. In the third 10,000 years, the hunt becomes a purpose in itself." There isn't really much to talk about here. It's kind of an interesting structure and is very reminiscent of like Chinese Shi poetry, but it's not really. It's the hunt. The real stuff is in the narration of this part.
But be not dismayed, O child of the world. The Luck's arrow will descend to purge the wicked abominations. You must follow the traces left behind in the storm's wake.
Okay, so this line is one of the deepest cuts that this trailer makes, and quite honestly is the deepest cut I think I've ever seen Hoyo make, aside from possibly something later in this video. So there is this Persian Ottoman faith that popped up in the 19th century called Baha'i. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Written by this dude named even harder to pronounce, I'm not going to even try, which teaches the essential worth of all religions and people and fights for the unity of all people. The line, "But be not dismayed, O child of the world," is possibly a reference to the writings of this guy, where he opens the 71st chapter of their seminary text with "Be not dismayed, O peoples of the world." So I can't quite tell you why, but this random ass Persian Ottoman weird modern faith that appeared in the early 19th century has a lot of parallels to the philosophy of this game. I have to look into it further because I have barely scratched the surface of the very complex morals of this religion, but I swear it's there. And maybe it's just brain rot, but it's so hard to explain what it is and why it's there, but it's there. So trust me on this one. The narrator then says that the Lux Arrow, probably just a fancy term for the arrow of Lan, will purge the wicked abominations. So from the level 34 quests in the game, we know that Lan sees creatures of the abundance as abominations because they don't die, they just continuously thrive, and that throws ecosystems off, as Welt says. But we're still talking about the creatures of the destruction here, so it's reasonable to assume that Lan has it out for both the abundance, a force that ruins by creating too much or not dying, and for the destruction, a force that destroys by, well, destroying. The crystal then says that the narrator must follow the traces left behind in the storm's wake, which is probably to say to follow the signs of the fight between Lan and Nanook. Interestingly enough, traces are both what the abilities you level in the game are called, as well as are an actual mechanic in the universe of the game. There's this loading screen tip that says that traces are the energy that are left behind by adventurers and trailblazers, which is interesting. So I was originally going to include in this video analyses of the designs and names of each Aeon, but I think that's going to make the script way longer than it already is, so I'll leave that for another video. But I will point out that Lan is a centaur, who in mythology are hunters, so that's kind of neat. Moving on to Noose, the erudition. Noose's poem isn't really a poem and reads more like just a statement of fact, which makes sense since they're literally a computer that became an Aeon. It reads, "If the truth of the universe is cruel and stale, would you still yearn for the answer? The knowledge seeker is impassive, for their core has been cold and unwavering since its birth, as cold as the end of the path they seek. Cruel and stale truth of the universe, you say? I'm interested." A lot of what I have to say about Noose refers to their name and the design, and since I'm leaving that for another video, this section is going to be a little bit short, but there is enough said here to warrant discussion.
The Celestial One guards their secrets, plotting out the roots that connect all things. But they are silent, like a shroud of mist at the center of the universe. Listen to the silence, and you will know where the stars are resting.
Calling Noose specifically the Celestial One is rather odd to me since they are one of multiple Celestial Ones, but I'm not really questioning it. I will question the choice of words though when discussing what Noose does, which is plotting out the roots that connect all things. To me, that sounds like they're trying to map the entirety of the imaginary tree, but I might be stretching it there. I just don't know what other roots that connect all things there would be. The next two lines are again poking at that motif of listening. The narrator says that Noose is silent and they command you to listen to that silence to know where the stars are resting, whatever that means. I do want to point out real quick that in the Chinese version of this game, the word for Aeon is Xingchen, which translates directly to star god, using the same word for god as is used in Genshin, the Shen. So I do want to point out because they are very directly tied to stars. So that's maybe metaphorical mentions of stars are also references to Aeons, possibly. Moving on to Yao Shi, whose name directly translates from Chinese as Master of Medicine or Teacher of Medicine, their poem reads, "She feels sad, for eternal life did not let her accumulate infinite wisdom. Instead, those she had once cherished faded into obscurity over time, never to return." Two things here. First, the poem uses gendered pronouns to refer to somebody here, and usually these poems are referring to the Aeon they represent. But since all of the Aeons, including Yao Shi, are actually genderless and use they them, either this poem is a slip up on the translator's part or it's talking about somebody else. Two, this is the only poem that is actively antagonistic against the philosophy of the Aeon it's talking about. The connotations of the poem are extremely sad and are that discussion of how lonely and awful immortality is. No other poem does that, even Nihilities, which is impressive. Sadly enough, even though Yao Shi's design is phenomenal, literally nothing interesting is said about them. It's it just pretty much says that they'll heal you if you're injured or sick, and that's it. Moving on to 9, the Aeon Annihility. 9, and yes, these are Roman numerals. If you look at it in other languages, they use a different font, and in English, they're both capital. So it's not Ix, it's 9. Is a pretty interesting case because while the game says they represent nihility, they really don't represent nihilism. I think the game's definition of nihilism or nihility is much different from how Nietzsche described it. Let me show you what I mean. So 9's poem reads, "All progress towards the void. All resist void. All will become void." Okay, so 9 is obsessed with the void, which is just code for death and destruction, which alone isn't nihilism. So let's look at the lines spoken.
Blindfold your eyes, they say, that the approaching darkness may strike no fear in you. Let it not burden your soul, nor numb your stride.
So really the only thing truly embodying nihilism here is the idea of blindfold your eyes, which I think is metaphor to saying remove yourself from the desires of humanity to prevent the inevitability of death and the destruction of the universe to scare you and weigh you down. But aside from that, that's really it. Nihility in this game is less about actual nihilism and more with just kind of living your life, going with the flow and doing what you want because everybody will die eventually, so just kind of chill and go with the flow. That's all I have to say about 9 without getting onto a very long-winded tangent about nihilism and Nietzsche and all that stuff, so let's move on to Qlipoth. Qlipoth's poem reads, "The philosophers gaze up into the sky, contemplating civilization's ultimate goal. Build a wall. The resounding ache rings within their head. Build the wall." I don't have much for this one. Build a wall to ward off the enemies from the sky. That tracks.
Push open the majestic gates, they say, and lift up the tablets of lapis. Read them aloud. Let the fire that forged the bricks and the ones that laid the wall's foundations be known.
Okay, so this is the other contender for the deepest cut in this trailer, and I'm honestly impressed with myself that I found this one. So, in ancient Mesopotamia, there was a common practice where stone tablets inscribed with cuneiform were placed in the foundations of buildings as it was being built. These tablets usually were stone, but were sometimes made out of rarer materials such as lapis. And the tablet's whole goal was to sing the praise of the kings and people that built the building to future generations that might find it after tearing it down or finding it after the building collapsed. So pretty much it's there to immortalize and to serve as a historical record of who built this building that just fell. Because now that this building no longer exists, there will be this tablet, which is much more permanent, to continue carrying on the legacy of these builders or kings or noblemen that, funded the building or whatever. The line Black Swan speaks here is a direct parallel to that. Lapis tablets, which Mesopotamians did use lapis tablets sometimes, read them aloud and speak of the fire and men that made and placed the bricks that built this wall. It's a super neat reference and is made even better when you consider that Mesopotamia is one of the oldest civilizations that we know of, and Qlipoth's section is referring to this. And Qlipoth is the oldest Aeon, although it might also serve as foreshadowing, saying that even the oldest and most sturdy civilizations have to collapse, just like Mesopotamia did. It's weird. Do note also that writing into a stone or lapis tablet, lapis is a gem or is a crystal, and you are writing your memories into crystal. I'm just putting that there. We'll get... It's on the table. The final Aeon that actually has a proper section to it is Shipa. Their name in Chinese roughly translates to adorner of hope, although it is an awful translation and it's not from Chinese. Their name is actually probably a reference to Shipa Totec, an Aztec god of spring and regeneration. Shipa in the game is the only Aeon that is actually plural, meaning that their presence is multiple personalities / multiple beings. They are not just genderless, they are multiple identities, which is really neat. Their poem reads, "Behold, a perfect home. No sorrows, no disobedience, no longings unfulfilled, no memories of agony. How envious." To me, harmony is really cool because it feels like they shouldn't really exist. I'll talk about this later when I do a more thorough deep dive of the Aeons, but Xipe to me feels like they are too similar to both nihility and equilibrium to actually have a reason to exist in the form that they do. They have kind of that same idea of don't do a whole lot, just kind of exist for a bit, but unlike nihility, Xipe wants to continue existing in this perpetual reality as this one hive mind of a being instead of just accepting death as it comes.
Then they say, "Oh, you who have reached the end."
This line is very reminiscent of Dane at the end of Travail saying, "You who has set foot in this world." I also want to point out that Black Swan here adopts a plural voice to speak for Xipe. Until I learned that Black Swan was confirmed to be related to another Aeon, I honestly thought that she was going to be an emanator for Xipe, but maybe it's just an artistic choice or whatever.
Enter into the paradise that envelops all. Join this great choir and feast. Listen to the beating of billions upon billions of hearts, holding you in their embrace.
So this line has a lot in it. Xipe, after this trailer, really gives me the icks. They just seem like they're awesome in practice, but like, with how they speak in this video, they really seem like they're pushing for some strange version of the Human Instrumentality Project, and I very much do not like that. But what really stands out to me in this line is the last few words, holding you in their embrace. Again, with that concept of embrace. Now, I've been spending the past couple of days trying to figure out what embrace in the context of this trailer means, because in Honkai Impact, embracing with a Hersher is just code for giving into the will of the Honkai and restarting the Samsara. But in this game, it seems different. It seems more along the lines of a motif instead of an actual like concept in the universe. Maybe like embracing an Aeon is walking their path. That's really the only idea I have, but it's still weird and it comes up time and time again. Okay, so after Xipe, shit kind of hits the fan. It's this next section is going to be fucking crazy, so just hang in there. This last scene, this next sequence is just gonna flash a bunch of stuff by you. I'm gonna play the entire sequence, and then we're gonna loop back and talk it down bit by bit. And do remember that this is all still the Chalice talking. So here is the crazy ass sequence of this trailer.
Look upon the courtesan's extravagance, the mariner's intemperance. Listen to the infant in the mirror, the waves as they enter the dream, the tipping of the balance, the shapeless prince.
Okay, let's stop right there. So if you watch that scene, that sequence again, except this time with YouTube captions on, you'll see that there are actually a few things hidden away in the transcription of this part. At the start of this sequence, it makes sense. The Black Swan says to look upon the courtesan's extravagance, here courtesan probably meaning a prostitute of high standing, with the elation being depicted in the video, and in parentheses, the captions read hedonism, which is a personal pursuit for pleasure and entertainment. Then for Veration, who we know as Ouroboros, the Black Swan says to look upon the mariner's intemperance. Mariner here being a sailor, and intemperance being a lack of moderation and control, with the caption saying gluttony. So it seems like these parentheses are just here to expand and give a more specific word to these concepts that the Black Swan is talking about, right? Well, when the Black Swan switches her command from look to listen, again with that idea, things get much harder to interpret and follow. Black Swan says to listen to the infant in the mirror, with the parentheses elaborating that the infant is the end of all things. On the screen, the beauty is given, who we know is or was Adrilla, and we know that her followers are the keeper of the mirror. So the mirror symbolism here makes sense, but the end of all things is a little weird. Black Swan then says to listen to the waves as they enter the dream. Remember that this entire sequence that is being read to us is a story told to the narrator of a book from within a dream, or it's the dream of the narrator of the book. So the Chalice could be saying to listen to the waves as they intrude on the dream, like when your alarm clock goes off and you hear that in your dream. The parenthetical text here is flapping wings for like the waves and consciousness for dreams. I feel like the consciousness one here is saying that the dream is also consciousness. It's like being like you're still conscious or something. They're one and the same, possibly. I'm not entirely sure on this one. In the video, the propagation is depicted while this line is being spoken, who we know was entirely obsessed with insects. That was their entire motif. So maybe it's like the buzzing of mosquito wings is what it's talking about with flapping wings instead of the wings of birds. I have no clue. After that, the Black Swan says to listen to the tipping of the balance, with the parenthetical text saying samsara after it. Depicted underneath this line is first the enigmata, mythos, and then the equilibrium, who. The enigmata is entirely about concealing information from humanity, while the equilibrium is about exactly that. Equilibrium, a state where everything is in balance and there is no conflict, no vying for power, nothing. Absolute peace. However, the weird thing is that Who just kind of disappeared one day, not unlike Akavili. Apparently, according to stories of the Equilibrium's followers, Who kind of wove themselves into the fabric of the universe or something along those lines, but it's just kind of unclear. It's all just vague metaphors. All we know is that they existed at one point, and here the swan is saying to listen to Who's equilibrium fall out of order, and the captions are saying that this has something to do with the samsara. So completely unbeknownst to me, samsaras have been a concept in Hoyoverse games for quite a while actually, and apparently the entirety of the universe in Honkai Impact 3rd is stuck in a 50,000 year samsara. Either the people in that universe beat the Honkai, or they reset the samsara. So the mentioning of a samsara here does not bode well for anybody. The Shapeless Prince against the current, I have absolutely nothing for. I don't know.
And finally, measure the world against yourself, and take all such things to heart. This is the path you should walk, they say. Akavili, depart once more. Akavili.
In this final scene, we see the Astral Express being watched over by this figure, who we know by the simulated universe is Fuli, the Remembrance. The obvious question here, though, before even talking about what Black Swan has to say, is why Fuli? Well, I have an idea. Remember when I said to pay attention to the set dressing at the beginning of the video? The chalice and the candles that Black Swan has, as well as her opening remark of requesting an exchange of memories, implies that she has intense ties to Fuli, and that there's a possibility that she is an emanator of Fuli, since her proper title as given to us by the Billy description is the Rememberer Black Swan. An emanator, for those that don't know, is somebody who is so dedicated to the path that they stride that they have pretty much received direct blessing from their respective Aeon to use that power directly. So why would Fuli be watching over the Astral Express like this? Well, one of the lasting mysteries of the universe in this game is what happened to Akavili. Akavili just kind of disappeared at some point and nobody knows why or how. But here's the thing. There are two beings we know would for sure understand or know what happened to Akavili, Noose and Fuli. Even Kafka tells us in the Shanzhou quest that the Aeon to ask about what happened to Akavili is Noose. But here's the thing. I don't think Noose knows, or at least they're not the Aeon to ask. Knowing what happened to an Aeon is not really their job. Their job is to solve for mysteries that have not yet happened and to understand the mechanics of the universe and everything in it. While yes, having a large collection of data to work off of is important for being the literal embodiment of erudition, that is not what being the erudition entails. It's just kind of a prerequisite. Fuli, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of the Enigmata. Their job is to remember, to prevent information and memories from becoming lost. If anybody out there remembers what happened to Akavili, it would be the Aeon who remembers all that has not been touched by Mythos, and it's very likely that what happened to Akavili has not been touched by the Enigmata yet, so Fuli would remember. We can back this whole idea up by recontextualizing this entire trailer. Again, this trailer is entirely a monologue spoken by light from a crystal chalice. The two things that symbolize Fuli are crystals and pure white prismatic light, instead of the warm amber glow of stars and fire like with Nanook and Kleepoth. So this entire trailer is spoken by a voice of the Remembrance in a way, because it is a pure light that is coming from crystal. And when we take that into account, lines like in the beginning where the chalice is recounting how Akavili came to be an Aeon makes a lot of sense, since Fuli would be the most likely person to remember that. And on the flip side, they would know what happened to Akavili in death, as well as everything in between. So everything here are actually memories being imparted onto the narrator of the book by this chalice, by the Remembrance. That alone makes everything here so much more understandable. And when you combine that with everything else I've covered, I feel like this trailer is all but cracked wide open. All of these talks about towers falling to Nanook's destruction and Lan hunting out the abominations and all of these things, they all are spoken like memories of things that actually happened long before, we start the game, because this is all the voice of Fuli, who is recounting these memories as they are referred to as in the beginning of the trailer. These are all memories. This is an exchange of memories. These are all things that happened. So what about the end? That last line that Black Swan reads from the book.
Countless shooting stars streak the sky tonight. Should you choose the right one, it will carry your wish to thousands of distant worlds.
Well, in the line right before this, when the narrator says, Akivili, depart once more, the parenthetical text elaborates, saying that depart is synonymous with connect the worlds. Really, the path of the Trailblazer, according to this trailer, is to connect the worlds, as a connected society is much stronger than one in pieces. And at the end of Urilo 6, Sela and Bronya watch as the Astral Express departs, and it looks quite a lot like a shooting star. So, the narrator says, if you choose the right shooting star, you may very well have chosen the Astral Express, and they may carry your wish far and wide to all the hundreds of planets they may travel to.